Joining us right now, someone who doesn't want to talk about the Redskins, Joe DiGenova. He's our legal analyst, former U.S. attorney. Joe, happy second day of December, sir.
And happy to you guys.
Joe, we've been talking about, of course, the fixes to the healthcare.gov website and all the logistics involved with whether people are going to be able to get on and get their health care, and all the people who have lost their insurance because of the Affordable Care Act. And last week we talked about how the U.S. Supreme Court is going to take up the religious challenge based on the Hobby Lobby suit. But there's now this other issue that's brewing out there. Scott Pruitt wrote about it in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about the state exchanges. Explain to me the legal problem the administration is going to have with regard to the Affordable Care Act and the state exchanges.
This is a big deal. Under the Obamacare Act, the penalties and the subsidies can only be imposed and provided through state exchanges. For those states that do not have state exchanges, which is in the neighborhood of 30 plus,
including Virginia,
tax penalties and subsidies cannot be rewarded or imposed. And what that means is that that's almost $1 trillion of funding for Obamacare that cannot come to be. Now, the administration has taken the position that, I know that's what the law says, that it has to be a state, but it really means the federal exchange too. Unfortunately, the law doesn't say that. One judge has thrown out the lawsuit in Oklahoma. A D.C. judge has allowed the lawsuit to go forward, and motions for summary judgment are pending here in D.C. This could be the single most important piece of litigation in all of this criticism about Obamacare, and it's gone on completely unnoticed. This is amazing.
Let me just understand this, because it makes sense that the states who opt out of the Affordable Care Act didn't receive the subsidies that would have gone along with the Affordable Care Act, but it also works in the reverse. In other words, the individual mandate, which was deemed a tax by the Supreme Court and therefore constitutional, if somebody in Virginia that is not buying into the state exchanges, if someone in Virginia decides not to get insurance, the tax penalty for the individual mandate won't apply to them because it has to go through a state exchange, which in fact doesn't exist?
That is correct. That is exactly what the law says. The law is very clear. It's in sorry about this. It's in Section 1311, and it says that such tax penalties and subsidies can only be provided through a state exchange. What the administration is trying to do is say, it may say that, but we think it also means federal
by state exchange, we meant federal exchange.
Yeah,
that's a stretch.
I think this is so big. You remember when this thing first started, we were all talking about this. My complaint was that they were trying to impose Medicare on the states, and of course that was right, and the Supreme Court struck that down. But that just said you can't force states to expand Medicare. Included in that was this little provision.
Right.
Well,
and
unbelievable.
This has gone completely unnoticed. This is a staggering development. If this thing if this is going to the Supreme Court.
Well, that's fascinating. But it seems like every time we get into another element of the law, it either is got a problem or it has been delayed and pushed off.
Exactly.
At what point does the law not become a law because nothing about the law is being enforced?
This is what happens when you pass a 2,000-page bill that nobody knows what's in it, including 75 taxes and all this other stuff. So but this is going to happen. It's like David Plouffe saying Obamacare will be working effectively in around 2017. Guess who won't be in office then?
Right. Yeah, that was convenient, wasn't it? Right when Hillary takes over.
Yeah.
Well, now I want to talk to you about this other thing that we talked about this morning regarding it sort of has to do with health care, and that is, we're all a little worried about the amount of information the government's going to have at its disposal about us when Obamacare is fully implemented. The story has to do, however, with a woman from Toronto. She wants to get across the border into the United States.
Trying to get away from Mayor Ford.
Well, and one can understand that. And she gets to the U.S. side of the border, the Canadian border, the U.S. side of it, and they say, I'm sorry, ma'am, you can't come in because in the last 12 months you have been treated for clinical depression. She goes, how do you know that? Because my medical records are supposed to be private.
This is a very disturbing development. And for all of us who, I'm all in favor of surveillance and NSA doing stuff, although I think as I've told you before, I think their massive collection program is unconstitutional. No court has decided that yet. What happened here was the woman went to the airport and she was told, even though she had traveled repeatedly over the years with no problem to the United States and gone on various trips, she was told that she had a psychiatric incident which required hospitalization, And in order for her to get on the plane to go to Miami to get on her cruise boat, she had to talk to one of 3 doctors in Toronto and get them to okay it. Now the question is, how did Customs get the information about her medical records?
Yeah, how does that happen?
And this story, I have to tell you, I hadn't read it until this morning, thanks to your executive producer Heather Smith. This is an amazing story, and I can't imagine that there aren't going to be congressional hearings on this. And if you're at Customs and you're at TSA or DHS, there's going to be some splaining to do about this. This is remarkable.
Well, and when asked about this, I mean, the Department of Homeland Security said we can't talk about individual cases, especially when it has to do with their health care.
Convenient.
Well, yeah, isn't it convenient that you can keep people from coming into this country because of their medical history, but then you can't tell us why?
That would require sharing of information from the Canadian government to the United States government. And my guess is that no Canadian, if this is true, if that's how it happened, rather than some database scrounging by the United States government through NSA, and believe me, NSA picks up a lot of information. Not just they pick up everything. They pick up business records, medical records, and that's the danger of having nobody supervising something as big as NSA. They could have gotten this information, shared it through Customs, and gotten it to them. We don't know. That's the point. So there's no doubt this story is going to become a very big story, and I cannot see the legal justification for sharing medical records without the consent of anybody. It's one thing if somebody's locked up as a result of a mental proceeding, and that's
right. And there's a criminal record.
But this woman was not locked up.
Well, she's certainly not a threat. She's a quadriplegic.
Yeah,
she's in a wheelchair.
And
it's unbelievable.
Not only was she not locked up, the police were never called. It never touched law enforcement.
That's right. This has nothing to do with law enforcement, and so it's a pure medical record. And so the question is, how did DHS get this medical record? It's a very simple question, but I'm going to guarantee you they're going to have a very difficult time explaining it, because once they find out how they got the record, it isn't going to be pretty.
Really quickly, Joe, does she have legal standing in America? I mean, one would...
Absolutely, because she was harmed in America.
Right.
That happened in the United States. She has legal standing to sue, and I hope she does.
One good side here is, the upside here is that people are actually enforcing the border and asking questions as people try to cross the border. This was news to me.
Oh, yeah, you got to get those people in wheelchairs, man.
Well, and basically keeping Canadians out of the country, how could that be a bad thing?
Here, Brian.
All right. Joe DiGenova, always good to have you. Thanks. You are not going to be welcome at the next Capitals game, my friend.
I guess not.
Don't speak ill of Canada.
I'm kidding. I'm joking.
Thanks,
I
Joe.
love my Canadian friends.
Take care.